Okay, the Easter egg for this session will be announced in the chat during the session. Please be sure to follow the KOTESOL code of conduct, and having your video camera on during the session helps the presenter. You can send your tech questions on the chat and I will try to answer them from my desktop account, which is labeled host. I will use my phone for talking, but it's easier to type on the desktop. Please welcome and wave to Bryan Alkema. He has a master's degree in applied linguistics and over 20 years of teaching EFL and ESL in North America, Asia, and the Middle East. He currently teaches at Handong Global University in Pohang, South Korea. His research interests include developing student voice and autonomy in the classroom. Thank you so much for making the time to share your presentation with us today.
Thanks, Sarah. Welcome to all of you. I hope that that you've been enjoying the conference so far. This is a workshop session, so I'm not planning to talk for the entire time. I'm hoping instead to create a dialogue. So you'll see here that I try to be creative in my title, getting on the same webpage, creating consensus about online education between educators, students, and administrators. So there we go. This is what I'm hoping to do. I'm going to start by telling you a short story and then going through some of the points and describing some of my own experiences and where they came from. And then we'll get into some discussion. If there are enough of us, we may get into breakout rooms. Otherwise, we'll just do it as a full group activity. And one of the takeaways is for each of you to think about what you would like to tell your students and your administrators about online education. So I want to start with a very short story about an experience I had when I was an undergrad. And I had in my second year, I decided that I wanted to add a history minor to my English major. And so in order to fit that in, I needed to take a third-year history class. So I was in my second year, I was taking this third-year history class. And we ended up doing a reading by, I think, a noted economist, John Locke. I did the reading, but I had a very hard time understanding the content. I tried. I gave it a couple of good shots, but at the day of the class came and I was not confident. So I went to the classroom about 10 minutes early, and there were these third-year students who, you know, they looked like they had it all together. And I asked them, guys, did all of you do the reading? And they kind of looked at me and said, of course we did the reading. And I said, good. Can somebody explain that to me in simple words? Because I did not get it. And they looked at each other, and then they looked at me, and they said, we didn't understand it either. So we ended up asking the professor to go over the reading and tell us what he really wanted us to get out of it. I sometimes feel that right now, as educators, we may be in the same situation where we think that we are the only ones struggling, but I'm not sure that's the case. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit. I think that on this one, this workshop is not based on a lot of accumulated data. It's a little bit more anecdotal in nature. I think in a traditional class, what we've, a face-to-face class, what we've experienced in the past has been, you know, here are the educators, and we come into class with our own set of expectations. And then at some point we are joined by students, and they have their own set of expectations, but there's a fair amount of overlap in a face-to-face or traditional setting between what we expect and what our students expect. And our administrators, they may not have quite the same level of, but there is still some overlap. I think that most of our administrators can sort of imagine what happens in a traditional face-to-face class. Now, what happens with online education? Here we come in with our set of expectations, which have changed over the last couple of years as we've become more familiar with with what we think as educators, online education is. Our students come in with their own set of expectations, but you'll see there is less overlap, which is something I'm going to come back to. And this is our administration. At least this is my representation. I often feel that our administrators do not have a good, clear concept of what I'm doing in my classroom. And you'll see that between these three circles, there is now a gap where we are not in consensus. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit tonight. Over the last couple of years, I mean, online education has been around for a while. It was around before the pandemic. But over the past couple of years, as educators, we've experienced a rapid learning curve about what online education. That's our past. And our present includes some uncertainty, especially in Korea, as we're looking at living with COVID and what does that mean for us as a culture? And what does that mean for us as educators? Are we going to be back in the classroom next semester? Or are we still going to be doing hybrid or online? What's it going to look like? There are a lot of questions, and right now, not a lot of clear answers. Our future may include online education, because even if we do learn to live with COVID, I don't think we're going to be going back to what it was exactly 2 years ago. I think that in some ways we've let the genie out of the bottle, and online education is going to be a part of our reality. However, through conferences like this one, through magazine articles and professional development, I think that we as educators may be close to consensus about the opportunities, the challenges, the strengths, the weaknesses of online education. Maybe not in agreement about what it looks like in my classroom and in your classroom. But I think we are approaching some level of consensus as to, how tools like Zoom can be used. And yes, there's always room for improvement, but I think as educators, we're close to being on the same page. I'm not sure our students are on that page. And on this screen, I'm going to tell you 3 very short anecdotes and where they came from. The first one comes from journals and interviews that I had with my students. And I asked my students earlier this semester, how are you studying? Not just in my class, but in other courses you're taking at this university, and how is it going? And many of them said, oh, Professor Alkema, we hate Zoom. We've done so much Zoom and we really don't like it and we feel disconnected. And I read entry after entry telling me the same kind of thing. And then a week later, we had a small COVID scare at our university, a couple of confirmed cases and things like that. So the university said, let's do everything online for the next week. So I ran some Zoom sessions. Now, you would think that after all of my students wrote all of these journal entries about how bad Zoom was, they would have come to the classroom if at all possible, but they didn't. Over half my students attended through Zoom. And I asked, guys, what's going on? Because you all told me that you don't like Zoom. Now you're Zooming. And they said, Professor Alkema, it's really easy to answer that question. We all know that face-to-face education is better, but Zoom is more convenient. And as busy university students, we're taking the path of least resistance. It was an interesting insight into what's going on the other side of the desk. Students, as I've talked to them in one-on-one conversations, I'm like, I use some recorded lessons. I ask them, how are these recorded lessons going? And they're like, Professor Alkema, your recorded lessons are quite organized, and that's great. But I'm playing them at 1.5 times the speed, and I got a few other windows open at the same time, so it's a little bit hard to concentrate. That's their idea of multitasking. And then last semester, and I was not the only one who experienced this. I don't think this is a failure of me as a teacher, but I experienced a much higher level of failures and dropouts in my class. So did my coworkers. So did my Korean counterparts. We had a professional development workshop earlier this semester, and they said the low achieving students are feeling left behind. and they are dropping out, and they are not learning, they are not succeeding. This is the student perspective of online education, and it's much bleaker than our perspective as educators. I think that many students are not at this point well educated about how to study effectively online. And if we really want to change that, I'm not even sure it's possible to change it for all students, because I think many of our students are not really willing to invest a whole lot into the process. I think over the last 2 years, they've kind of had it with online education. And they see it as a necessity. They may see it as convenient, but I'm not sure they see it as something that they really want to invest a lot of effort into. So one of the questions I'm going to challenge you to think about is, can we change the perspective? Is that even possible? And if not, if so, let's do that. But if not, what does that mean for our use of online education? Is it really going to be just like plan B? Is it something that we're going to say it doesn't work as well, but we're just going to have to suck it up? I'm not really satisfied with that as an answer, but I'm also not sure about whether I, as a teacher, can really change the perspectives of my students. I want to tell you a little bit about the administration. Now, educators and administrators, I mean, our relationship is never as smooth as we would like it to be, right? There's always some bumps in the road. But these are some of the perspectives that I've been picking up at my university over the last couple of years. And one of them is that the administration really thinks that online education means that we can all run larger classes, or that in some way that they were actually looking at reducing the value of an online class, like 2/3, 2 credits instead of 3 credits, because it's easier. And as educators, the people in my department, I mean, we're assigning essays and giving feedback, and we're doing oral or discussions and interviews and things like that. And we're like, this is not easier. This is not easier. So I think there's a gap there between my understanding and the administration's understanding about what an online English class really is. The second perspective, coming out of our presidential addresses, we have faculty retreats at the beginning of every semester. And for the past couple of semesters, our faculty retreats have been really focused on AI for fairly obvious reasons. And the whole thrust of it is that AI is going to make everything better. AI is now seen as the savior. AI is seen as the way to go, and it's going to solve all of our problems. And I'm taking a look at this and saying, yeah, I'm not sure that's entirely the best way for language classes to develop. The third perspective, coming out of the technical training and professional development that we're doing, we have an office of professional development. And in the past, I've been working at this university for about 5 years. And for the first couple of years, the professional development that was there was a lot about teaching. For the past 2 years, it's been a lot about technical issues, like how to use Zoom effectively. And I think the two are not the same. But from the administration's point of view, I think they see a big area of overlap. And again, that's a different perspective. So I'm not saying that I'm right and they're wrong. I'm saying that their perspectives are different from my perspectives. And I think we need to recognize some of those differences and maybe look on closing the gaps that I've described. I think that on the whole, administrators do not have a clear understanding of the purposes or the processes of language classes. I think some of their recommendations and suggestions may work well for content classes, but not so much for language classes, because we're looking at a different purpose and a different process within our classrooms. And I also don't think that these administrators who are making decisions which have fairly significant ramifications for my classroom don't really have a clear understanding of how AI or online education can support the purposes and processes that I have in place. So that's my story and some of the perspectives that I'm picking up from my students and my administration. Now, I'm going to invite you to get into some discussions for the rest of this workshop. And I think that the questions run, I mean, we can focus on what I've talked about already in this workshop, or we can go a little bit deeper, because some of the purposes and processes that I talked about really depend on what is the purpose of English education in this university or within Korea. What about digital literacy? We have a responsibility to teach the language. Do we have a responsibility to teach digital literacy to our students? And if we don't do it, who is going to do it? And if nobody does it, what do we do with the students who are kind of left in that gap because nobody's taught them what's expected of them? One other area that I'd like to mention before we break out into some more discussion is the area of authenticity. We teach in a predominantly EFL situation where students have a hard time really using the target language outside of the classroom. And one thing that I keep in mind is that students, if they're going to use English, their second language, they're likely to do that in an online setting more than in a face-to-face setting. So should this, and if so, how should this be reflected in our pedagogy, in our classroom activities, and in our assessments, whether we're doing those face-to-face or online? What does this issue of authenticity and online education, how do those overlap? So those are some of the questions and topics that I think that we might have a very fruitful discussion from this evening. The takeaway, what if you could tell your students one thing about online education, what would that be? And how are you going to get that message out to them? And similarly, if you could say one thing about online education to your administrators, what would that message be? How can you effectively give that message to them? All right, we're going to get into some discussion time at this point. Sarah, what do you think? Should we do breakout rooms or do it as just a group discussion?
I think let's try it as a group discussion.
Okay,
and if it's too noisy or something, we'll make smaller groups.
Okay.
So if everybody is here and listening, you can unmute yourself. And if you feel comfortable, you can show your face. Then we can know who's here. So Erica, Maria, Annapurna, and Danielle, I think. Are you all here? I definitely can see Erica, so thank you for turning your camera on. And anybody else, you can also type if that's more comfortable.
Yep, chat's fine too. I've got my chat window open.
Why don't we start with Erica? So Erica, which of the questions spoke to you, or which one do you really want to answer? And can you, yeah, that's perfect.
Well, I'm a teacher in Brazil. I teach English as a foreign language in a public school. And as you were going through some of the difficulties the students have faced, and the question you have asked on digital literacy, it does play a big part in how students are getting along with their learning process. In Brazil, for example, we had some difficulties concerning this these achievements in terms of getting students to develop digital literacy. At the same time, they have to carry on learning everything else. So I do think we need to take, we have done it in our school. We had to take a break to make sure students could get familiar with the tools they were using.
Oh no, I guess we lost her. Maybe she'll come back. Is anybody else here? Maria or Danielle by chance? Well, I'll add something. So I'm teaching, if anybody wants to interrupt, that's fine, but I'm teaching at a university, Busan National University. I'm teaching global studies department. So they're not learning English so much as just using it to study global studies topics.
Yeah.
But digital literacy was an issue for sure. And learning how to use Zoom, you know, I think the thing that I would like to say to students, your last question or second to last question is, we were not trained for this.
No.
You know, we were trained to be educators in a classroom. And so I'm not supposed to be good at Zoom is what I want to say, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Erica, did you come back? Okay,
Yes,
we'll
I
talk
have.
about.
I just forgot to charge my laptop. I was talking about how students are having difficulties. And then I just forgot to charge my laptop. Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
you want to continue a little bit?
Yeah, so I was just, I think it's a very important discussion to talk about how digital literacies need to be developed at the same time we carry on teaching. We can't ignore this change in terms of platform has a significant impact in the learning process, especially when dealing with little kids or young teenagers. I mean, there's a huge impact in terms of social interaction. They need to have room, they need to have enough space so can they socialize. I mean, the same needs they have in in-person learning needs to be met when they are learning, you know, like in a virtual arena. I mean, they need to have room to play, they need to have room to interact with each other. It's not just you know, the thing is not just carry on giving them the same knowledge input. I was talking to other teachers about making room for our students to have those little chats, you know, like unsupervised break, you know, so they could talk to each other. I mean, if they have this need in, let's say, face-to-face learning, why wouldn't they have the same need when they are learning remotely? So I think we need to think about these needs in a more you know, careful way. So all necessities, not just, you know, like input, knowledge input necessities are met.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of Zoom myself. This semester, I'm using a blended, but not a hybrid approach. So I'm using a combination of recorded lessons and face-to-face sessions, and that's been going fairly well. But I did have this one encounter with Zoom because our university kind of pushed us in that direction for that 1 week that I mentioned. And I was doing, you know, the same sorts of activities, but the discussions went much shorter. There was much less interaction between the students. I know my students, you know, and normally I give them a discussion and I give them a little bit of support and they go with it. And in Zoom, that did not happen. So I'm looking at the same students at the same time of day, doing the same type of activities, but with incredibly different and much less productive results just because they're on Zoom. Now, I don't think, you know, it's not like Zoom is my arch enemy or something like that. I think that this is just, again, it's a gap in the student's expectation. I was expecting pretty much the same sort of thing because I know it's possible to have a good discussion on Zoom. We're doing that now. But for my students, I could see their heart was not in it. They were not expecting to have a good quality discussion because it was Zoom. And that's the sort of difference in expectations that I think as educators, we need to be aware of, that our students are not expecting success just because it's done online.
I would also add, though, that I think it's not only their expectation, but it's social pressure. When you're in a classroom, there's a lot of social pressure to do what the teacher says.
Yes.
And on Zoom, there is so little.
Yep.
So especially in a breakout room, if you don't have like a very strong atmosphere of actually doing whatever was asked, they were just chilling in their breakout room,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And or maybe speaking in their first language or something, and then you enter the room to check on them as you would walk around the classroom, and suddenly it changes to English.
Yep.
And in a real classroom, it's rare. It's much more rare that would happen, right?
Yep.
So okay, so I think that it's just the three of us. So
looks like
we can just continue as we are.
Sarah, what you have just said has reminded me of Michel Foucault when he talks about schools at a place as a place where surveillance, takes place. Like the teacher as someone who is able to have this panoramic view on students, but in a way that he actually compares that to prisons, to the prison setting. There is a person who is able to keep this sort of surveillance, keep everything under control. And I believe, of course, there are many negative aspects of this kind of surveillance and rigid supervision, but I believe there is a positive thing about having a teacher supervise you, and make sure you're doing what you're supposed to.
Yeah.
I have felt this. I have just come back to in-person classes, and that made a world of difference. I'm dealing with young teenagers, so teenagers who I cannot guarantee they are mature enough, to do what they are expected to do at the time we have assigned for classes. So, supervising them in this sense, I'm not talking about rigid supervision, prison-like supervision, but I'm talking about friendly supervision. I believe this is necessary because, as Bryan was saying, what kind of expectations do they have when they step into a Zoom class? I believe they are very low expectations. They don't expect much from themselves. They don't expect much from us.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, Bryan, just a few things. So I'm typing in the chat something that I heard a lot in my training, which was guide on the side or sage on the stage. I think of myself as a guide on the side in most of the cases. And also I feel like a orchestra director or a composer, where so instead of like prison guard, it's more about like a composer position. And yeah, they need us to direct them. They're not gonna study by themselves in a classroom together. It's not gonna happen, right? So yeah, anyway.
Yeah. I was also, I've been using recorded lessons a fair amount this semester, and some of my colleagues will, if they give a recorded lesson, they'll immediately create some sort of quiz or follow-up activity for that. And I'm less likely to do that because I'm teaching my students some of the independent skills, like how to write a good topic sentence or something. So I'll see whether or not they've benefited from the recorded lesson as they get to the output stage of the course, right? So if they have not watched or engaged with the recorded lesson, their topic sentence is not going to be what I've told them it should be. And indeed, this is what I'm finding from some of my students. It's pretty clear based on the questions that they ask after I give them some feedback and suggestions. It's like, I talked about that in one of the recorded lessons, and you didn't catch it. Now, that happens in a face-to-face classroom as well, right? I say something, but one of the features of a recorded lesson, and something that some of my students clearly do, is they're like, Professor Alkema, recorded lessons are great because if I miss something the first time, I can backtrack and watch it again. And some of them are benefiting from that. But others of them are just as obviously kind of, going through it, doing the minimum and not really engaging. And that concerns me because I don't put together recorded lessons as a minimum, a tool for the minimum. I put it together as a tool for the maximum. I still expect to have my students' full attention and engagement, just as I would if we were in a classroom together. But I'm not sure my students are willing to give me that.
Especially before you're talking about the students who are traditionally on the lower grade end of the spectrum, they're probably not watching your videos. I'm sorry to tell you.
I know.
And so it's like they're just skipping all the classes, right?
Yes.
And at the end, they're trying to like pass the test or whatever it is without any learning. So it's back to your questions about the online learning experience and what we want to tell admins or the students. What do you want to tell your admin, if you could?
I think the message that I would really like to tell my administrators is that online education does not make it easier for teachers or for students. Now, I get that some people, we all have different learning styles. I've done some online courses. I like online learning. I think online learning has a tremendous amount of potential, but not for everybody, and not if it's being forced. I think it should be a choice rather than a force. Now, we didn't have any choice during the pandemic, right? We all had to do it. Okay, I get it. But the key thing that I really want my administration to understand is that, especially for teachers, it's not easier. It is equally as difficult in a different way. And I'd like that to be, you know, I'd like my learning and expertise in this area to be recognized by the administration to the point where they would, before making a decision, maybe consult with me and say, what do you think about this decision? Now, that's a little bit unrealistic. I mean, they don't consult with me about face-to-face classes either, right? So I know it's a little bit pie in the sky, but if they're going to start making decisions about online education and the number of students who can be in a classroom, I think they really need to consult with me first, because it's not easier. Not for me, not for my students. So that would be kind of my message. What about for you, Erica? If you could tell your students or your administrators something about online education, what would that be?
I agree with you. I believe it. I mean, online education has been forced onto us because we had the whole thing with the pandemic. And sometimes I see some people like who are really excited about the possibilities, such as having guest speakers. I mean, we had guest speakers from all different corners of the world. But I mean, that's not the only thing we need to consider. I mean, as you said, there are many difficulties and many challenges, and I don't think online teaching works for everyone.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah, I agree. I think from now on, I mean, we're hoping the pandemic we're gonna be able to look at this as a past event, something that happened in the past. Yeah. As we move away from this reality, I believe online teaching should be considered an option for those who are willing to to undertake this sort of a learning process, and not forced to everyone, because this would marginalize or exclude those who cannot cope with it, or who just don't have very high expectations, regarding this process. People who don't believe it works for them.
Now, I also have students who really like online learning. Students who have, for example, who struggle with social anxiety, or some of the outliers. A classroom is in some ways a community, and some people are closer to the middle and others are just outliers. And I was one of those when I was in high school, not so much in university, but certainly in high school. In high school, I would have been a prime candidate for successful online learning. Just leave me in my nice little cubicle or whatever and let me do my work. That was how I always did it the best. And the rest of you go away and leave me to it. So online learning, it's good for some people, right? But again, for the administrators, and I realize that administrators, they're not trained educators and they don't have some of the background experience. So they're looking for the simple solution. But as educators, we know that really there is no simple solution, because education, especially language education, is a complex process. So trying to find simple solutions to a complex process, trying to find one-size-fits-all answers to language learning, which is done differently by everybody, is, I think, not the best approach to take.
Bryan, I couldn't agree more. I believe if we have already this common belief, across the ELT field, that people learn differently. Yeah. This is common ground. This is something all of us share. And I believe this belief should be extended to online learning. If we believe people learn differently through different methods, why should we believe everybody will be successful learning online? Yeah, I believe this process will be more challenging for some, and acknowledging that online learning can be more challenging, more difficult for some, we should be able to be flexible.
Absolutely, yes. And the same is true, I think, for students who, at least in Korea, I think my students are always comparing themselves to other students within the same community. You know, what are they doing, and why is it so easy for that person and so difficult for me? Well, one of the answers is because you learn differently. And you know, this activity may speak to or may be easier for some students to engage with. Your turn will come. But again, that may be easier for us to pick up on as educators in a face-to-face setting, and much harder to pick up on is a student not engaged because they didn't get enough sleep last night or because they have a different learning style. I have a chance of picking that up if I can observe the whole person. But if all I see is this tiny little Zoom, you know, snippet, or if the camera's off, then I got no chance at all. I mean, there's no way I'm going to be able to make a successful analysis of what's really going on. So the same message, I think, needs to go out to our students that as a teacher, I'm teaching not to a class, I'm teaching to a number of unique individuals who happen to be studying together. But when I present any activity, some of them are going to grab it and others are going to drop it. And that's just what it is. My responsibility is to pick methods, topics, suggestions, whatever, that I think are likely to be, you know, to lead as many students as possible to success. The student's responsibility is to grab onto that. Right? We're always looking for those active learners. A student who is just sitting there thinking that magically their language ability is going to increase just because they came to my classroom, that student is not really gonna benefit, right? They need to be able to receive what I'm teaching them and to engage with that. And we see some of our students doing more of that and some of our students doing less of that. But with online, either with a recorded lesson, I don't see what they're doing. And with Zoom, I can see some of it, but not a whole lot of it. And I think that my students are really kind of assuming that if they just attend the Zoom session, they're going to master the content or the skill. Now, that may happen with some content issues, but it's not the best way of developing skills.
Can I ask a question too?
Yeah.
Okay, so before you were talking about how the credit system might have changed from like 3 to 2 or something like that. Something that like really is I don't know, puzzling or troubling to me is like the devaluing of our work through online education.
Yep.
And so I've been very careful not to do recorded lessons because I don't want my department to be able to say, thank you so much for your recorded lessons. Have a nice life. Yes. I don't think they would, but how can we know, right? And I'm not blaming anybody who's doing that, but I've been thinking about it a lot. Yeah. And how can I make myself irreplaceable? You know, no AI taking my job, you know, stuff like that. So have you been worried about that, or what are your thoughts? And Erica, I don't know if that works is it high school or middle school setting?
A middle school setting.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very legitimate concern, the one you have. I mean, we're dealing with times in which education is being treated as commodity.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, increasingly, I've been talking to a friend of mine who is a researcher in the UK, and I was talking about possibilities for me to, studying under her supervision. And she just told me, like, oh, Erica, you need to be careful because universities here are quite market driven. So you may not get funding for your research if you do not develop research on this or that specific topic. I mean, who is to decide which topic is relevant? And I believe this decision has been driven by the market. Yeah, by market needs. I mean, what's going to help people in universities make more money? And so in this kind of context, I believe that making ourselves more irreplaceable, you know, is a smart decision. I mean, more than smart, I mean, it has to do with our own survival. So,
yes. Yeah. My personal response to that, and something that I'm trying to build into our department more, is that really, I don't see myself as much of being an English teacher as a language or communications teacher. So I'm teaching skills, and I'm teaching those skills in English, but many of those skills, whether they're presentation skills, discussion skills, reading or note-taking skills, writing skills, a lot of that is the reception, integration, and provision of ideas. And those ideas need to be organized. Those ideas, need to be complete. Those ideas need to be expressed in ways that other people can really understand. And those skills are transferable. So when it comes to me being replaced, this year I've been working on a research project with Grammarly, seeing what Grammarly can and cannot do for my students. And some of my coworkers have been, concerned that Grammarly might replace us. And at the end of our research project, I realized, no, Grammarly is not going to replace us because right now, AI is not able to take a look at whether a topic sentence really contains the purpose and organization for the entire paragraph. There's no way that AI can do that at this point. That may come in the future. It's not here yet. I don't see it looming on the horizon. So as long as we, especially at the university level, which is what I'm familiar with, as long as we are keying our ideas and the feedback we provide to our students, the teaching and the feedback we provide to the conceptual level rather than the technical level. One thing that our university president did say, and this was a very real thing, we as teachers should not be teaching our students to do what computers can do. We should be teaching our students to do what computers cannot do. And right now, computers and language, AI can do the technical stuff, but not the conceptual stuff. So that's what I'm really trying to make sure that I'm providing to my students, because in that way, that's my job security. Until AI gets a whole lot better, that is my job security.
Well, it seems like we're finished. Is that the end?
Yep.
Yeah, that was great. And Erica, thank you so much for chatting with us, and everybody else for listening. I'm sure there were lots of listeners.
Thank you very much. I mean, I learned a lot. I mean, it's very nice to exchange ideas and learn from different realities. And see, we still share a lot in common.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
A pleasure to meet you, Erica.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Sarah, you did a really good job just setting things up and making sure that it went well tonight. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It was really enjoyable, and I'm glad I got to chat too, because I like this topic.
Okay, I'm going to turn off my screen share.
Okay, I'm going to change the hosting to Andrew White, who will be doing the next presentations host job. And also, you guys can chat about.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, sorry. The Discord, there's a social tab that anybody can chat in if you want to.
Okay. Hi, Andrew. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm very fine. Thank you.
Good.
I trust you had a good presentation.
Yeah, it went fairly well. We had I was hoping for some interesting dialogue, and that's pretty much what we got out of it. So I'm feeling satisfied.
Excellent. Excellent. And let's hope that can carry over into the panel discussion that I'm about to be hosting as well.
Well, good luck with that.
So I've made you co-host. Can you see all their functions?
I'll give a rundown of them.
Oh, I'm gonna stop recording. I'm sorry, I haven't hit stop record. I'm gonna hit that now.